1 through 11. Luke 5, verses 1 through 11. Once while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he saw two boats there at the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we have worked all night long, but have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boats to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. So when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching people." When they had brought their nets to shore, they left everything and followed him. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Over the years, as most of you know, I have taken dozens of groups on service trips to various parts of the world, usually students. The most difficult trip I ever took was at the beginning of beginning of 2004. I had 20 students with me on that particular trip. On the second day, 8 of the 20, about half the group, came down with food poisoning because of a restaurant that I had taken them to the day before. We split up for that meal, so these 8 were my charge, and I took them to a restaurant I had heard about, my idea. All 8 got very, very sick, except for me, of course, which made everyone a little suspicious. It got so bad that we had to take all 8 of them to the hospital. For 2 days, they stayed in the hospital with IVs in their arms. And if that wasn't bad enough, the group really didn't get along very well. I had 2 factions in the group that really didn't like each other. And then the 2 groups would come to me and expect me to fix it, right? So I was not doing enough according to one or the other group. I remember calling Sue from where we were. I remember calling her from the trip and telling her that it was such a disaster. I told her it'd probably be my last one. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to, go dig ditches or do something else. It was a grueling week. It felt like a month. Came home, I was discouraged. I felt like a failure. The trip was a failure. I was a terrible leader. All those things that you feel. But now as I look back on that trip, years later, over a decade now, I feel quite differently about it. I mean, all those bad things did happen, and it was very difficult. But on that trip, there was a young college sophomore on his first trip ever named Shin Fujiyama. And how strange it would be that on that particular trip, there would be someone on the trip that would start a foundation, start an organization, and end up transforming thousands of lives. You just never know, do you? John Maxwell, former United Methodist pastor, wrote a book some time ago called Failing Forward. He's written over 70 books through the years, mostly on some aspect of leadership, selling over 20 million copies, having many of his books translated in over 50 different languages. He says this in his book, Failing Forward: "To live your dreams, to find the life you desire, one must embrace adversity and expect failure to be a regular part of life." He says, if you're not failing, you may also not be moving forward. He said there are so many books on the market, some he said he wrote, on success. And he decided he wanted to write one that trained people for failure. So this is the final week of our series that we're doing on finding a meaningful and full and authentic life. This is number 5. If you missed any of them, you can go on the website and listen to them if you want to. Today's topic may be the most important of the 5 in my view. It can undermine all the rest in some ways. Coming to terms with the debilitating power of personal failure. And this is where so many can get derailed. Maybe because, and I don't know why this is. I mean, partly it could be maybe the way we were educated in school. We feared that red check mark in that upper left-hand corner of the paper, wherever your red check marks appeared. And don't tell me you didn't get any red check marks, because I know you did. Ominous, or that embarrassing F on our test, or for some it was that embarrassing or C, that shaming C, when all your friends were getting A's. Some were trained to believe that being wrong or making a mistake or falling short or having a weakness was the ultimate black mark on your character, or a sign that we're defective. I think one of the things that Jesus came to do, and I don't know how much we talk about this, but one of the things I believe that Jesus came to do was to help change our attitude about failure. Here's the thing. No one gets to decide whether or not they're going to fail. Everyone fails. We've all made mistakes. We've all been disappointed at our performance. We've all felt the reality of not measuring up. Some think if we didn't have that kind of attitude about failure, that shaming, defective attitude toward failure, we would just give everybody license to fail all over the place. But I actually have a hunch. I have a hunch that maybe the exact opposite is true. In our text today, Jesus is speaking to the crowds. The crowds are getting larger and larger. They're pressing in on him, the text says. And so he has an idea. He sees a couple fishermen. He's going to get in one of their boats, and they're going to push out to sea, and he's going to sit down and talk to them from the boat. That way everybody could see him, and it's not so crowded. He doesn't have just 5 people standing around him. It was Simon Peter's boat. And he gets in there and he does his talk, and everyone waits patiently, or Simon does. He stops repairing his nets or cleaning the nets, whatever he was doing. And when he's finished, he looks over at Simon and he says, "Hey, since we're out here, why don't we let down the nets and see if we can catch some fish?" And Simon sort of smiles politely and says, "Look, I've been fishing all day. I'm tired. I want to go home. We've not caught anything all day long." I picture Jesus saying something like, "Come on, Simon, don't be so negative. I've got a good feeling about this. Just let down the nets." I picture Simon kind of looking away and rolling his eyes at this point. But he doesn't. He pushes out a little further from shore into the deep water, throws down his net, and you just heard the story. The nets are filled with fish, overflowing with fish. So much so he's got to signal James and John from the shore, his partners, to come out with their boat and help him with the catch. And they fill both boats to the point where they're just barely sticking out of the water, and they make it to shore and start unloading the fish on shore, and then something surprising happens. Peter runs up to Jesus, or walks up to Jesus, and falls on the ground and begs Jesus to go away. "Depart from me," he says. "I'm a sinful man." How interesting the circumstance. "Depart from me, I'm a failure." Peter is ashamed. Covered it up. Maybe he was successful. Maybe people didn't know it. He was a big guy, talk loud, kind of bossy sort of personality. But inside, he felt shamed. Sinful man, go away, Lord, go away. His religious training had taught him that the worst thing that anybody could be was a failure. The worst thing anybody could do was fail. I believe that today, if you ask people, most people or many people avoid the church because they believe that the primary message of the church is don't fail. We're here to help you not fail. Or else. And I think a lot of times people don't feel they need that message. Doesn't sound like a message you would necessarily run to hear. But what if people knew or really understood that the primary message of the church was the one that Jesus gave to the woman caught in adultery when he said, "Neither do I condemn you"? What if they really knew or really felt or really recognized that that was our message? Neither do I condemn you. And by the way, if that woman couldn't take in that message, just like us, she'd never be able to hear his next statement, which is, go learn from your mistakes. But without that first message, neither do I condemn you, we are almost guaranteed to repeat the mistake over and over and over again. What if people flocked to the church because they needed a break from the relentless condemnation and shame that they receive so often in the world? Here's the thing about failure. The thing that we're so seldom taught in school or church. The only shame in failing is the shame that comes from ourselves and from others. It never comes from God. Think about that for a minute. The only shame that comes in failure is the shame we put on ourselves or the shame that comes from others. Peter, like so many of us, viewed failure as an obstacle or an enemy rather than a pathway, rather than part of the journey. You might remember the famous Thomas Edison quote when after failing to make the light bulb work after about 10,000 tries, and he says, "I haven't failed, but I have successfully eliminated 10,000 ways that the light bulb won't work." Listen to how Jesus responds to Peter. He says, "Don't be afraid, Peter. There are great things in store for you." That's it, isn't it? It's the fear of failure that becomes so debilitating to us. Because it's so connected with shame. A fear that says we won't measure up, or we don't measure up, or we won't be good enough, we won't be able to pull it off. That fear that paralyzes us, makes us shrink back, stop dreaming, stop hoping, stop believing. That fear that maybe we won't be able to do it. Better play it safe. Better to not take the risk. Better to not try. Better to not dream. Better to not reach out. Better to not do something uncomfortable. But failure, although difficult, may be one of the most necessary things if we ever hope to find the meaningful, full, authentic life that we've been talking about. Our ability to face failure. Some time ago, I was writing a book for college graduates. And I was writing this chapter on failure. Just so happens. And in my research, I came across a guy by the name of Jia Jiang. His website is fearbusting.com. He decided to try something that he called rejection therapy. He got the idea from a game that I guess existed that he once saw. And so in an effort to lower his fear of failure, he decided that for 100 days, he would try to, each day, do something that would guarantee a failure. Can I get that? So for 100 days, he would do something that would guarantee that he would fail. What he was hoping was that after a while, his fear of failing would decrease. So here's some of the things that he gave himself to do. He was to go up to a stranger on the street and ask to borrow $100. He was to go up to the counter at the McDonald's hamburger and ask if they would provide him with a free burger refill. He went to a Krispy Kreme donut shop and asked them if they would mind making a donut in the shape of the Olympic symbol. He thought that would be cool. He went into a Domino's Pizza and asked if it would be okay if he delivered their next pizza for them. He went to Costco and asked for permission to make an announcement over the intercom. He went to a TV station and asked if they would allow him to give the weather report. Every day, and you can go read them, go to his website and you can read all the different things that he did. And of course, as you can see by the list, he probably was successful in failing. He said at first it was hard. It was hard to do because he'd go in, he'd feel kind of foolish. Someone would say no to him, which was like, it's just so hard for someone to go up and to say no to him. But he said that after a while, he kind of got used to it. It wasn't so intimidating anymore. He became less afraid of being told no. And then he also noticed that he was so at first he said once he got his no, he'd turn and run away. Okay, and he would go away. But as time went on, he started saying, oh, well, why not? You sure? Let me show you. You can make that donut if you just put them really close together. So he began to focus on what he was asking rather than on his fear of failure. So his fear stopped controlling his approach. The fear of failure no longer became as debilitating or humiliating for him. He became more courageous. And the more we give into our fear of failure, the more we shrink back, the more power fear gets. The more power fear becomes, more powerful fear becomes. Peter assumed that because he made mistakes, because he failed, he wasn't fit. He wasn't fit to do anything important. He wasn't fit to be a follower. He would never assume that could happen. In fact, most rabbis at that time were looking for the above grade person to be a student. A more perfect people. But not Jesus. Jesus went after the fisherman, the common person. He wanted honest people. He wanted open people. He wanted people that were willing to at least acknowledge that, yeah, I failed. He wanted forgiven people. Jesus had a different way of thinking about failure. Forgiveness for Jesus meant that our mistakes and our failures and our weaknesses and our blunders are not limitations. Rather, they are the only way we grow. Without your mistakes, you would not grow. It's the path toward wholeness. Almost all motivational speakers that you will ever hear will say something like this. If you knew you would not fail, what would you attempt? If you knew you would not fail, what would you try to achieve? And Maxwell said, I heard that for so many years and even said it many times. He said, but I actually didn't, at the end, I wasn't sure that was such a great question. So he changed the statement. He changed the quote for himself. He said this. He said, if you were no longer afraid of failure, if it was no longer attached to shame and condemnation, if you were no longer afraid of failure, what would you attempt to achieve? Forgiveness is the antidote for the shaming power of failure. It's the counter message to condemnation. What we are seeing as limitation and weakness, Jesus says, I see as opportunity. You know, forgiveness isn't the end goal of the church. It's just the starting point. It's just what gives us the presence of mind to live the life we were given to live. It's not the ultimate goal. I think sometimes that's misunderstood. Makes me think of Isaiah 40, verse 31. Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. Remember this verse? Shall mount up with wings like eagles, shall run and not be weary, shall walk and not faint. Not because they do not fail, but because failure does not have the last word. Coming to terms with failure is a crucial part in discovering and living a meaningful, full, and authentic life. Disconnecting it from shame and condemnation. Maybe as we just take a moment, prepare ourselves for our communion time together, maybe we could just take a moment and think about that a little bit. Think about our relationship to failure. How does it work for you? What kind of power does it have in your life, in my life? Have we taken in that message? Do we believe that Jesus really said that? Neither do I condemn you. Do we actually believe that? No matter what you think about in your past, no matter what you think about, no matter what decisions you make, do you hear the message? Can you hear it? Can we take it in? Can it become a lived reality inside of us? Do our failures still shout shame? Or can we learn and grow from our mistakes? Let's take a moment and just take a moment of silence together and think about that in a moment of silent prayer.